Welcome to Natural Habitat Adventures Daily Dose of Nature. I'm your host, Brooke Mitchell, and today's topic is South Africa, Species of the Savanna, with NatHab Expedition Leader Lorraine Doyle. Thank you so much for being here today, Lorraine. Over to you.
Right. Thanks very much, Brooke. It's really great to be here. I'm sorry that there's no camera visibility, but I'm sitting in the middle of a game reserve, and so we kind of have bush Wi-Fi. So we just try not to put any more stress on it than necessary. Um, so, but yeah, as always, it's great to be here and to be able to share something of um, what's happening here in South Africa. Um, so, just to get started, I thought I would just share a picture of me in the middle and then some of the staff at one of the lodges that we stay at on the Secluded South Africa trip. This is taken at Madikwe Game Reserve. Um, so, I thought I would just introduce a little bit about what the savanna biome is, where it is within Southern Africa, and why does it matter? Why do we even need to know anything about it in the context of looking at Southern African diversity? So hopefully that will become evident as we go along. Um, so savannas are found across the world. So they're not something that is exclusive to Africa. You have savannas in India, you have savannas in South America, and it's generally vegetation that grows under hot, seasonally dry climatic conditions, scattered trees, and continuous grass. And the reason that that is important is that is what allows us to have the level of diversity that we have in savannas, um, because we get enough rainfall for there to be trees within the landscape, but not so much that it becomes a closed forest. And so that's really what is one of the main drivers of the biodiversity that we find within these landscapes. So as I said, you find it really sort of across the world. So if you look at the picture on the screen now, the yellow areas are all some form of savanna, and there are differing types of savanna. Um, but all characterized with that same um, landscape description, if you will. So within South Africa, we have what we call arid savannas, which are areas that are dry, but not so dry that you could classify them as desert. And then many of our savanna areas within Southern Africa are what we call wooded or woodland savannas, which is very different to the savannas of East Africa. So East Africa has parkland savanna, the classic picture of the Serengeti or the Masai Mara, huge open areas with occasional tree. And as you'll see from some of the photographs that I'll pull up through this presentation, you'll see that South Africa has quite a different type of savanna, but savanna nonetheless. And so, as I've already sort of alluded to, it's to do with rainfall seasonality. So, rain that falls during the summer months, but not all year round. Fire also, historically and currently, plays an important part in how savannas are shaped. Um, and we use fire as a management tool from a conservation perspective as well in making sure that we maintain that balance between the woody layer and then the herbaceous layer or the grasses. And then edaphic factors really referring to things like soil type, moisture content in soil. And those factors all play a part in ensuring or maintaining um, that landscape structure. So if we look, this is a map of South Africa, and I included here 3 areas where we go on our Secluded South Africa trip. One is where the elephant is, and that's Madikwe Game Reserve in the Northwest Province in South Africa, and that is classified as arid savanna. So it has very red soils, which are actually wind-blown Aeolian Kalahari sand, and rainfall comes in the summer months, but it is really quite low. Then where the rhino is, that's at a reserve called Marataba, and that's what we would consider mixed bushveld. So bushveld is often in southern Africa tends to get substituted for the word savanna. And by mixed bushvelds, we're halfway between the arid savanna on the western side of the country, and then what's classified as the low-veld savanna, which is where I think that was, I meant it to be a leopard, but it definitely looks a bit more like a tiger. We don't have any tigers. But low-veld savanna, the eastern portion of southern Africa, much more moist because we have the Indian Ocean on our eastern coastline, and we have the warm Mozambique current that runs up the coast. And so that generally brings much more substantial rainfall to the eastern portion of the country than it does to the west. And so where you have mixed bushveld, it's almost a crossover position between the 2 different types of savanna within the subregion. So what I thought I would do this evening is use some images that have been taken on Secluded South Africa trips, predominantly this year and part of last year, just to showcase some of the animals that are found in all of those 3 reserves, and then some that are more specialized and found in 1 or 2 of the reserves. And I thought I'd start with the big hairies and scaries, because I think those ones are often the ones that are high on people's agendas when they're wanting to go on a safari. So I'm starting with the Big 5. For people who don't know, the Big 5 was actually a term that came out of the hunting world, and it was the 5 animals that were considered the most dangerous to hunt. So the first one of those here is lion. And this photo was actually taken very recently at Madikwe Game Reserve, and it was a surprisingly cold morning there. And this lion started roaring right next to us. And as he was roaring, so the hot breath was forming the clouds of steam that were coming out of his mouth. So another lion picture, this one taken at Marataba, and this particular boy is a beautiful black-maned Kalahari lion. So lion genetics vary across the sub-region, and there are a number of genetic lineages. The ones that tend to come from the Kalahari tend to have these much more black manes, and then we get some of our genetics that come from further up in Namibia, from a place called Etosha, and the Etosha genetics are generally a lot more blonde. So yeah, this is a beautiful black-maned lion in Marataba. And then this one was taken at Malamala, and this is a young male who's got a bit of a, it almost looks like a bit of a mohawk going on. His mane hasn't formed fully. He's probably only about 3.5 years of age. And this one was taken on a buffalo kill that they had made previously and now were feeding on. So yeah, so lions in all three of those landscapes and seen fairly frequently. So then the next of the big five here is elephant. And as you can see, there's a slight reddish tinge to the one animal in particular. It's not hugely red on this picture, but one of the things that often gets said to me when I show people pictures from Madikwe is there's something wrong with your color balance, Lorraine. And no, there isn't in this instance. The soil really is that red. So enormously high iron content in the soil, and it gives these elephants or any other animal for that matter that roll in it, it gives them this kind of reddish sheen. And yeah, this was just one particularly very cute little youngster, probably fitting under mom's front legs, so probably only about 3 months old. So yeah, very small. Still hadn't mastered the use of its trunk. So it's quite interesting to watch them because they run around with what looks like a piece of wet spaghetti because they don't know what to do with it. Then elephants, this one taken in Marataba, very different landscape as you can see, quite hilly. There's a river in it, but nonetheless another environment where elephant live, and it just shows in many instances the adaptability of these animals to live in a variety of these landscapes. One of the constraining factors for elephants is water. So elephants have to drink at least once a day, every day. So very highly water dependent species. And then this was an elephant that was clearly playing with his drinking water. This one taken at Malamala. So as you can see, a lot more green. The Sand River with quite a lot of water still in it, even though this is the dry season. So elephants in this environment have an easier time, if you will, than those in more arid environments. But nonetheless, they still do well in more arid environments, provided there is adequate drinking water available for them. And I just love this picture of, so elephants are quite funny at watering points. They like chasing things away from water. And this little youngster had decided he'd seen that little black and white bird there as a pied wagtail. And he'd quite clearly decided that he was now going to try and squirt water at it. He wasn't particularly successful in it, but he tried nonetheless. Then another one of the big five, the actual member of the big five is not a square-lipped or a white rhino as these are. It's actually a black rhinoceros, because it is much more dangerous to kill than a white rhino would have been. But because from a tourism perspective, black rhinos are much more rare, there's only 5,000 left in the world. We estimate approximately 40,000 of these southern white rhinos. But from a tourism perspective, the big five has now come to encompass white rhinos. So These rhinos here are very fortunate that still have their horn. Many reserves, including the one where I'm based, are now dehorning our rhinos because we don't really know how else to protect them from poaching. Rhino horn has become, and has for many decades, been something that is highly coveted in certain countries in the world. And all it is compressed hair. It has no use to anything except a rhino, but nonetheless, it has huge financial value in the right markets, approximately 100,000 US dollars per kilogram. A big rhino could possibly have $500,000 worth of horn, which is a huge risk to it. So this was a bit of a standoff. And you'll see that the one rhino with the particularly long horn is wearing a bracelet on its ankle. So one of the other technologies that we use is AI-enabled collars that allow us to know where our rhinos are and to keep track of their movements as another layer of protection for their for their well-being. This was just a cute little one that I always think they're just super cute when they're small like this. They almost look like they've run into a barn door with that little flat nose. But this one had had a great time rolling around in the mud. And as you can see, this rhino here also has got on an ankle bracelet. And then this bull, also at one of the reserves that we go to, has been dehorned. So an area where much more poaching had occurred historically, and so the decision was made to dehorn them. So we have to dehorn them every 2 years because of the amount of growth. And this is actually a territorial bull. So what he was doing here in this picture is he was marking territory. So what they do is they urinate and they kick their feet in the urine and dung, and then they walk around patrolling their territory, and that's how the scent gets around. Then possibly the most dangerous of all of the big five, buffalo, especially single male buffaloes like this one, old males that can't keep up with the herd. They're used to being a herd animal all their life, and now suddenly they're solitary or in small groups. And their methodology or their thinking is the best form of defense is attack. And we always joke that these, we call them dugger boys. The word dugger is a Zulu word for mud. And because they're getting a little bit thin on hair over their body, they often roll in mud to protect themselves. And they always look at you as though you owe them money. They just have a really particular look about them. This was another beautiful bull that was, this one was taken, I think, at Mala Mala. And he was having a little bit of a grooming service given to him. The animal, or the bird rather, in his nostril is an oxpecker, and they essentially take ticks off these animals. But yeah, sometimes they get very annoying, I think, because they go into the nostrils and into the ears of animals. So yeah, shortly after this photo was taken, he shook his head and the oxpecker flew away. And then another one of the big five, possibly the most beautiful of them, certainly photographically or photogenically, leopard. So most of the leopard photographs on this trip come from Mala Mala, partially because the other reserves until relatively recently, so within the last 30 years, were actually farmland, and farmers would persecute or shoot leopards because they would take their livestock. Mala Mala has been around as a conservation area for close on 70 years, and so the leopards have become much more habituated. And so they're just much more relaxed around vehicles. And this photo was taken on my last secluded South Africa trip, and it's a really interesting young male. He's got two different eye colors. So he's got one golden eye and he's got one eye that's much more green. But yeah, he was sitting looking at us from between the rocks. And then very cute little leopard cub, also taken at Mala Mala. We do sometimes see leopards at Madikwe and Marataba, but it is rare. And actually throughout most of Africa, it's rare to see leopard, and certainly very rare to see leopard this relaxed. And so it's a very special experience to actually be around animals that many people will, who come to Africa, will not get to see. But Mala Mala allows an amazing opportunity to view leopards. And then this one actually was just to show you how long the whiskers or the vibrissae are on leopard. Much, much longer than on any of the other cats. And essentially the widest part of any leopard is their whiskers. And they use that to determine how wide a narrow space is. And if they can feel it with their whiskers, the edges, then they know that that's the extent of what they can get through. That's the narrowest thing that they can get through. But this one was, it had taken a kill up a tree, and it just happened to be looking up at the time that I took the photograph. So then an animal that is not part of the big five, and which is not infrequently confused with the previous picture, or the previous animal, which is leopard. This is a cheetah. Very endangered animals, 7,000 of them left more or less in the wild. And these we see more frequently, if we are going to see them, in Madikwe and in Marataba, because they do better where there are lower concentrations of things like leopards and also lions, because they have sacrificed strength for speed. So everything about a cheetah is built for speed. And as a result, they're very lightweight, they have very thin skulls, and so they're very vulnerable to other predators. So they do better where other large predator concentrations are slightly lower. This is a coalition of males, so the females are solitary, unless they have cubs. Males generally do better as a coalition of brothers, and this is very typical of any cats. We call it allo grooming. This not only cleans but also builds the bond between them. And so this was two of the brothers at Marataba. And then this is typical marking behavior, also taken at Marataba. So a male spraying urine to mark territory. And as you can see in this picture, very, very slender, small head, tiny ears, long legs, very long flattened tail that they use as a rudder. And unlike the leopards, they only have solid spots. They don't have those rosette type spots that you would see on a leopard. Then another animal that was not classified in the Big Five, and yet is extremely dangerous. It wasn't classified in Big Five because it's not particularly dangerous to hunt, especially not in water. But these animals are very dangerous, especially if you get between them and water. And they have very large teeth used for nothing other than fighting. So they only eat grass, which they pluck with their lips. So any of the big teeth that you see in a hippo is purely a fighting tool, especially for the big males. So you can get some sort of an idea here. So these two pictures were both taken at Marataba, and that's the best place for us really to see hippo on the trip. And you can see the very large teeth in the bottom jaw there. So yeah, this chap had decided that he was not too happy with something that was going on, and so he was coming out of the water. And then this is a little guy or girl, I'm not sure which. This is a wannabe, as you can see, showing that mark of aggression in inverted commas. So that's what they do when they're showing you their teeth. That's showing you that I'm bigger than you are. And this little youngster was clearly thinking that he was playing monkey see, monkey do. So he'd obviously seen one of the other bigger ones doing this and decided he was going to do it. But for now, he's just cute. He doesn't have any teeth. Then a very, very special animal that we see rarely in the space of a day. So the only real time that we are fortunate enough to see them is if they are denning on a property and they have youngsters, because then they will be taking food back to the pups in the den, and so there's a greater chance of seeing them. As you will see, this animal is also wearing a tracking collar, and that's partly as well to help be able to know where they are from a conservation perspective, especially if they manage to break out of a game reserve and go into a community, because they will kill small animals, sheep, goats, if they do get into a community. And as a result, there's a risk of them being shot. And so the collars allow us to track them, especially to know if they are have escaped outside of park boundaries. Amazing animals with this beautiful patterning. All of them have this stunning pattern, white tail. So very, very special and unique animals. So these two were just having a sort of a friendly tussle. But as you can see, also enormous ears and very long legs, all of which are designed, especially the long legs, allows them to run long distances in pursuit of their prey. So they're what we call cursorial predators. So they run down their prey, unlike leopards, which will stalk and pounce. So different hunting methodologies. Then two animals, the small ones are black-backed jackals. So they sort of fit into the landscape in Africa much as coyotes would in North America. And then the other the bigger animal, although it's still a youngster, is a spotted hyena. They're incredible creatures, vital to the health of an ecosystem because they're the cleanup crew. They remove carcasses from the environment that potentially could harbor disease, but unfortunately vilified by the Lion King, that made them out to be really nasty, dirty scavengers. They're actually incredibly good hunters. So hyenas when they do hunt, are much more successful than lions. So lions only secure and 40% of kills initiated in, or sorry, hunts initiated end in a kill. Hyenas, spotted hyenas, have a much higher rate of kills initiated. Lions are also incredible scavengers. So out there, everything is about conservation of energy. And if you can get a free meal, it doesn't matter who you are, you're going to try and get the free meal. And that's what these two jackal were trying to do. And the hyena was having none of it. So he first of all chased the jackal around a bit and then decided, no, forget about this. I'm dragging whatever remains are here and I'm taking it away. So nobody's getting my kill. And I suspect that this is a young hyena. It didn't make this kill. So possibly lions made the kill. And this is the remains of the carcass, which this hyena had happened upon. And he was now going to take the spoils. One of the things I find really, really interesting is the interactions between different animals or even animals of the same species. And this was a really interesting interaction at Mala Mala. There was a lions on a kill, and this hyena was kind of hanging around on the periphery, and these white-backed vultures were there. And this was a very interesting interaction between this also relatively young spotted hyena and these vultures. Normally that kind of behavior you wouldn't really see, but it's just further proof that, we know so little really about how these animals interact and view each other. So this is another species of hyena, this photograph taken at Madikwe. We don't see them often. These are brown hyenas, so smaller, much more of a scavenger, with this beautiful sort of russet dark coat, long fluffy coat, and stripy legs. So wherever you have very high concentrations of spotted hyenas, you generally don't have brown hyenas. So yeah, special if you do get to see them. Then other big animals that people coming on safari are always keen to see, things like these giraffe, also interactions between giraffe, pretty cool to see. And then youngsters, this young giraffe, not quite sure what he was doing, but he was sort of jumping around, quite frisky. One of the interesting things you can see here is it looks like he's got paintbrushes on top of his head. So they have little horns which are actually correctly called ossicones. And when they're young, they have all this tufted hair on the top. The females generally keep the hair on the top. The males, when they fight and they bash heads against each other, they often wear off the hair on the top of the ossicone. But yeah, this little one had particularly well-developed fluffy ossicones. Then zebra. So plains zebra, the species that we get in this part of Africa. Also animals that are high on a lot of people's lists, possibly because of their amazing coloration. These beautiful striped skins. And then, yeah, this was just a particularly sweet interaction between a mom or a foal and the mother. So in good condition, and the way that we tell that is the mane is standing completely upright. These animals always look fat, and that's because they're hindgut fermenters, so they're full of gas. But the way you tell that they're healthy or not is looking at the mane. If it's got enough of a fat layer to support it, it stands upright. If not, it flops over. A special creature that we only really have the opportunity to see at Maritaba. This is a little bat-eared fox, and they actually listen with those huge ears for the movement of bugs and larvae and things underground, and then they'll dig for them. But yeah, really cute with their little Zorro masks and their big ears. Then other animals that are just fascinating and fun to watch because of their antics. So these are chacma baboons. We see mostly these guys at Maritaba and Mala Mala. This was just a little one suckling. Um, I just I thought this was just so classic that this mom had sort of grabbed this little one and it was just all ears and tail, and the other one's looking the other way, not really paying any attention to what's going on. Then other animals, so we have a large variety of species of antelope. This is a waterbuck. Um, it actually doesn't live in water like some animals like Sitatunga do, which occur up in the Okavango Delta. But these animals run into water when they feel threatened, hence their name. So males have beautiful horns. The females do not. There's a couple of young males here. But this was a really interesting interaction at Mala Mala. This one youngster was absolutely fascinated by the warthog. And it was following the warthog around. It followed him around for quite a while. So yeah, as I said, interactions always really interesting to see. So this is a female kudu antelope. One of those my what big ears you have. And those are designed for hearing in a relatively wooded environment, um, where you have to be on your guard for predators. If you've got big ears, you can hear really well. Males, males have these beautiful spiral horns. Females don't. All of them have the stripes, which we call disruptive marking. So that's to break up their outline, help camouflage them. This was just another interaction at a waterhole between kudu and some impala. Very common antelope, but an incredibly beautiful antelope. So the female's no horns, the male has horns. Then this was taken at Mala Mala on my last trip. A young foal nursing. This poor mother was having a very hard time of it because this little youngster was butting its head constantly in her to try and get milk. But yeah, so Inyala, only see these on this trip at Mala Mala because they're a species of the eastern moisture areas of southern Africa. And this is a male Inyala, completely different, almost could be a different species. Look exactly the same as the females until they're about 14 months of age. And then as they start to go into maturity, they change into these beautiful chocolate brown antelope with sort of yellow stockings. And then just a few fun, some of the other fun little animals. So these are dwarf mongoose. They're actually little carnivores. And the way that they mark their territory is they stand on their hands, like this one is doing, or on their front feet, and then they use an anal pasting to paste onto logs or rocks. And so that's what this one was doing. Very cute, but ferocious little predators will happily take down snakes. Yeah, quite fearless. And then we have two different species of squirrels in this part of the world. These are tree squirrels. So these ones were kind of cuddled up together. It was a cold morning and they were sort of keeping each other warm. And then we get another species which we really only see in the more dry areas like Madikwe. This is a ground squirrel. So as their name suggests, live on the ground, live in burrows, and this tail huge fluffy tail, which they then put up over their bodies when it's hot to shade them. They use it like a parasol or an umbrella. And then just a quick few non-mammals, possibly one of the most photographed birds in this part of the subregion. This is a lilac-breasted roller, very beautiful, terrible voice, has a cawing sound. This is a white-fronted bee-eater, another one of our really, really pretty species. Front refers to the forehead of a bird, so that's why it's called a white-fronted bee-eater. Another bee-eater that we see primarily when we do see it, we see at Marataba. This is the swallow-tailed bee-eater, also really, really pretty. And then this is the comedian of the bush. This was Zazu in The Lion King. We affectionately sometimes call them flying bananas. So this is a southern yellow-billed hornbill. He's actually doing a whole display here. They do this quite intricate dance between male and female, almost like a bowing motion, which is what's happening here. Another really pretty bird. This one we generally see in Madikwe, sometimes in Marataba, but only in the dry areas. This is a crimson-breasted shrike with this bright red breast. And then a special bird. This is a southern ground hornbill, endangered for a variety of reasons. Our largest hornbill species, and if we do see them, if we're fortunate enough, we see these at Mala Mala. So yeah, this one had caught something, not exactly sure what. And then just our largest flying bird. This is a Kori bustard. So we see this in the dry areas, so Madikwe, sometimes in Marataba. I always chuckle in the books because they refer to them as reluctant flyers. They need a runway to take off. And then our largest bird, fortunately, which does not fly, this is a common ostrich. And yeah, this one was giving us a bit of a beady eye. Again, generally seen in the drier areas. They do better in more warm and dry environments. And then I just included a couple of trees, just because they are either really pretty or play a really important part in the landscape. So this is a tree called a weeping boerbean, and it's called weeping because it produces an excess of nectar when it flowers, and that actually drips out of the tree, and that is designed to attract insects, so to facilitate pollination. And so you have a hive of activity starting around this time of year when the trees start flowering, all coming for this nectar. And then possibly the classic idea of what a savanna looks like. So this was actually taken on the reserve where I'm based. And just to give you an idea of the sort of flat top trees, they occur in all of the reserves we go to. The flat top is a strategy for allowing maximum exposure of leaves to sunlight for photosynthesis. But the sort of classic flat top tree with a lion or some other animal in the picture. And they produce these masses of beautiful white flowers that almost we jokingly refer to it as African snow, which are a huge attraction for many insect species. But interestingly, these trees are also pollinated by giraffes. So considered the world's largest mammal pollinator. Rodents are quite common pollinators in many parts of the world. But giraffe, this is amongst their favorite food. And what happens is they get pollen on the ossicones and on their head as they stick their head in to eat the leaves and the flowers. And then what they do is they then go to the next tree and do the same thing, and so they cross-pollinate. And so, yeah, an animal that we probably wouldn't consider to be a pollinator actually is a pollinator. And then African sunsets. There are always many, many beautiful African sunsets, always with stunning colors, and usually whether it's a tree or an animal, to make really good photographic opportunities. This one was taken at Marataba. So there were some egrets. I think there may be some African spoonbills somewhere in here. But yeah, they were silhouetted against the sunset while we were on the river. So yeah, lend themselves to pretty interesting pictures as well. And this one, I'm just trying to think. I think this one was also taken at Marataba recently, and it was just a particularly beautiful. It was a sort of a cloudy day, and it just gave rise to this really, really beautiful sunset. So that really is a sort of a whistle-stop tour around Southern African savanna and the types of animals and birds and a couple of plants that people can expect to see if they come on safari to this part of the world. So happy to answer any questions anybody has. But yeah, that's all from me for now.
Well, thank you so much for that virtual tour, Lorraine. I know that I am just itching to get back on a plane and over to Africa. We have some fantastic questions. Everybody, feel free to send in your question as well in your control panel. So first, now that I know that you're actually working on your master's on rhino conservation, this question is perfect. So you brought up the dehorning process. Does that hurt rhino, or is it like cutting a fingernail? And then what happens to the horns once they've been removed?
Yeah, so good questions. So rhino horn is purely compressed hair. It's the same as your hair and my hair, just compressed. It is like cutting your fingernails. So when we dehorn rhinos, we dehorn them 4 fingers above their growth plate, which is like where your cuticle would be. And so the horn regrows. So essentially, we have to dehorn them every 2, maybe 3 years. And what happens to the horn is it gets taken to a vault, in our case, a vault in an undisclosed location, and it is simply locked away. That is all that happens to it because, yeah, there is nothing and no use for it, and we don't want to fuel the trade. So, yeah, it gets removed and put in a vault.
Great, and it doesn't hurt them. That is fantastic to
No,
hear.
no,
Very
it is
fascinating.
really like cutting your fingernails.
Yeah, great. So next question here, could you maybe explain a little bit more of the camera you were using to take these photos and how far away were you? Did you have a big lens? Or can people see these animals with their naked eye, or do they need binoculars?
I use a Nikon DSLR. So the bird photographs, I'm using a big lens, so on a 600 millimeter zoom. But many times, even the birds are right next to a vehicle. Um, you can absolutely see these animals with your naked eye. Many of those, for example, that lion was sitting pretty much in front of the vehicle, and he had walked up to the vehicle and lain down there. So definitely visible with the naked eye. It's not the sort of thing that you're only seeing through binoculars very far away. And sometimes as well, lions, it happens with leopards sometimes as well. If it's hot, they'll get up and they'll come and lie in the shade of the vehicle. Um, there's never any danger associated with that to humans because they just don't see us as any form of threat or as prey. But absolutely, you will get to see them very easily with your naked eye.
That is great to hear. So, next question, we have another conservation question, which I love these, of course. So, what are some of the contributing factors that have led to cheetah becoming endangered?
So, cheetahs, there's a number of factors. So, one is a very, very small genetic pool. So, cheetahs went through some form of genetic bottleneck probably about 25,000 years ago. We don't really know what caused it, but cheetahs went down to a very, very small number of individuals. And obviously, what happens with that is that you get inbreeding and you get a weakening of the genetics. So that's one of the challenges that they face. The other challenge is loss of habitat. And this is a challenge for all conservation of all species throughout Africa and probably the world. Um, Cheetahs need primarily flat, open landscapes to do best. And those areas have been developed by humans, or we've put fences, cities, highways in those areas. And so their habitat has become very constricted. So in South Africa, for example, to try and help manage the genetic issue, we manage all our cheetah populations within mainly private reserves, but as one meta population. So we try and swap out cheetahs to try and mix up the genetics as much as we can. But it's a substantial challenge, and those are the two primary reasons that have kind of led to cheetahs being endangered.
Thanks for explaining that. Next question here is what species of giraffe did you have in those photos?
So those are Southern or South African or Southern African giraffe. So we really only have one species of giraffe here. Um, so yeah, we don't have things like Maasai or reticulated giraffe. So yeah, we just have the one species of South African or Southern African giraffe.
Awesome. Next question. What months of the year are best for viewing babies and young ones?
Um, so it's quite a difficult question to answer because for seasonal breeders, so things like impala, um, they drop their young all together at the beginning of the rains, so in the hot summer months. But a lot of our animals, lions, leopards, elephants, giraffe, zebra, are not really what we would call seasonal breeders. And what that means is that there is always the potential to see young throughout the year. Um, so it's only if people want to see um, some of the seasonal breeders, then and their babies, those are going to happen from probably November through March when the rains arrive. But for the others, any time of year that you would be here, the potential for seeing youngsters is there.
So all times of year. That's exciting.
Yeah, yep.
Oh, awesome. So it looks like only one primate species was shown in the presentation today. Are there more primates, or how many species
Um,
could somebody see in the area?
so we don't have great primate diversity in this part of the world. So to see any of the great apes, you need to go much further up into Central Africa. So the the species I had here was a chacma baboon. We also get vervet monkeys, so a species of monkey, and then we get two species of bush baby. So we get a greater and a lesser bush baby. There is one other species of monkey called a Sykes or Samango monkey, but that really only occurs in the Indian Ocean coastal belt tropical portion of the country. So those really are the only species of primates that we have in this part of the world.
Great. I'm actually getting a lot of follow-up questions about rhinos. So I'll ask you a couple more of those if you are okay with
Yeah,
that. So
sure.
it looks like we have a great question here. Could you maybe explain why rhino horns are so sought after?
It's a very good question, and um, sadly, the answer is that it's sought after primarily now as a symbol of wealth. So historically, rhino horn has always been used in the East in some form of medicinal um, way, or possibly as an aphrodisiac. But most recently, the trade has become a symbol of wealth. So, to give you an example, um, rhino shaving sprinkled on cocktails to show how wealthy you are. Rhino horn powder snorted as you would, heaven help us, cocaine. Um, so, for no other reason than those, and it has absolutely no properties whatsoever um, that would be of any use to anyone except a rhino. But that's the main reason, and it it's been a long-term problem. We've been dealing with this problem since actually the 1980s, maybe even before. But it's just escalated in the last 10, 15 years, and it really is linked to a symbol of wealth, not to anything else.
Which is why it's so important for us to travel to these areas and show that we appreciate our wildlife alive and thriving. So I'm really, really glad that you uh, um, know all about it. So I do have one more question here, and
Hmm.
it's actually related to the small felines. Do you ever see any caracals or any other species of cats?
Um, so they are much more difficult to see. On occasion, we might see African wildcat. Um, if we're very lucky, we might see serval. Um, it's possible, I mean, caracal are there, um, but just very difficult to find or to see, bearing in mind that a lot of these small cat species are strictly nocturnal, which just makes them all the more difficult to find. But there is definitely a possibility. Like there is a possibility to see things like porcupine or honey badgers, um, lots of those creatures. The problem with them being that if they're strictly or primarily nocturnal, it just becomes much more difficult to find them.
Yeah, that makes sense. So it's always just a great bonus, icing on top of
Hmm.
your safari when you get to see those really special species.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Well, great. That is the last of the questions we will take for today. We have reached our time. So, Lorraine, I will send it back to you for any last closing comments.
Just to say thanks very much, and also for um, everybody for if there are any other questions, I'm here to get emailed. I'm trying to reach out. And just thank you to you for hosting, Brooke. Thanks very much.
Wonderful. Thank you so much for for taking the time to present to us today. And thank you, everybody who tuned in. Join us tomorrow for our next daily dose of nature. You can check out this week's lineup, including registration links, on our website at nathab.com/webinars. We did record today's presentation, and we will have the replay available on our website soon. With that, I will conclude the webinar. Goodbye, everybody.